What happens when the man who thinks he has it all is forced to watch the woman he threw away get everything he ever wanted, and more? This isn't just a story of a breakup. It's a story of a spectacular downfall, a tale of karma served on a silver platter. He took his young mistress to the city's most exclusive restaurant, a place to flaunt his success and seal his victory. But in a twist of fate, he found his ex-wife at the very next table. She wasn't crying. She wasn't alone. She was glowing. And what he was about to witness would not only ruin his night, but shatter the entire foundation of his arrogant world. Stay tuned for a story that proves the best revenge is a life beautifully lived. The engine of the Porsche 911 purred with a deep, throaty satisfaction that Mark Thorne felt mirrored in his own chest. He glanced at the woman beside him, Tiffany Sterling, her blonde hair catching the neon glow of the downtown Los Angeles streets. She was 26, a decade younger than his ex-wife, with an ambition that was as sharp and polished as her acrylic nails. Tonight was a celebration. It had been exactly 1 year since the divorce from Eleanor was finalized. 1 year of what Mark considered unadulterated freedom and success. "Are you sure we can get a table at Aurelia?" Tiffany asked, her voice a practiced blend of awe and entitlement. "I heard the wait list is 6 months long." Mark smirked, downshifting smoothly as he turned onto the valet-lined street. "Aurelia is for people who make things happen, Tiff. We're people who make things happen." He had made a reservation under his corporate account, Thorne Capital, a name that opened doors and silenced questions. He was a senior partner at a private equity firm, a shark in a city of sharks, and he savored the spoils of his conquests. Aurelia was the ultimate spoil. Perched atop a skyscraper, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a godlike view of the sprawling city lights, a glittering carpet of souls he felt he was rising above. The divorce had been messy, but in his mind, clean. He had been generous, he told himself. He let Elena keep the modest suburban house they had bought a decade ago, a house he now saw as a monument to mediocrity. He gave her a fair settlement, enough for her to live comfortably, to continue her little hobbies. He had left her. He had chosen a new life, a better life, an upgraded model. Tiffany was that upgrade. She was a trophy, a testament to his status. Elena, in retrospect, had become comfortable, predictable. She was the sensible sedan you traded in for a sports car. As they were led to their table, a prime spot by the window, Mark felt a surge of triumph. The maitre d', a severe-looking man named Jean-Pierre, greeted him by name. The air was thick with the scent of truffle oil and quiet money. Conversations were hushed, the clinking of crystal silverware, a gentle symphony of the elite. "It's perfect, Mark," Tiffany breathed, her eyes wide as she took in the panoramic view. "Only the best," he said, settling into the plush leather chair. He thought of Eleanor, probably at home in that beige-colored house, watching some streaming service, maybe working on one of her little design sketches she used to talk so much about. He'd always found it a cute, if impractical, pastime. Interior design, she'd called it. He'd called it playing with cushions. He'd told her that his career needed to be the priority. He was the earner, the one whose work mattered. Her dreams were a luxury they couldn't afford to focus on. He remembered one night, years ago. She had spread out a series of detailed drawings on the dining room table, her face lit with a passion he hadn't seen in a long time. It was a proposal for a complete redesign of a local library's children's wing, a pro bono project she wanted to lead. "Look, Mark," she'd said, her voice buzzing with excitement. "If we open up this wall and use modular furniture here, we can create a dynamic space that grows with the children. and this color palette is based on developmental psychology to encourage creativity. He had barely glanced at it, his eyes fixed on a stock market report on his laptop. "That's nice, honey," he'd mumbled. "But the Henderson deal closes on Friday. I really need to focus. Can we clean this up? I need the table for my paperwork." He would never forget the way her light had dimmed in that instant, the spark in her eyes extinguished, replaced by a familiar, weary resignation. She had quietly packed up her drawings, and she never mentioned the library project again. Remembering it now, sitting in Aurelia with Tiffany, he felt not a pang of guilt, but a confirmation that he'd made the right choice. He needed a woman who understood the game, who was a partner in his ambition, not a distraction from it. Tiffany understood. She was currently taking a perfectly framed photo of her champagne flute against the city skyline for her Instagram. Her caption would undoubtedly tag the restaurant and praise her wonderful boyfriend. She was an asset. "To us," Mark said, raising his glass. "To the future." "To the future," Tiffany echoed, her smile dazzling. He sipped the ridiculously expensive champagne. The taste was crisp, cold, and utterly victorious. He was the king of his own world, sitting in his castle in the sky. Nothing and no one could touch him. They had just ordered their appetizers, Mark, the seared foie gras, Tiffany, the caviar service, when a subtle shift in the restaurant's atmosphere caught his attention. A few heads turned towards the entrance. Jean-Pierre, the usually unflappable maître d'été, was personally escorting a new couple to their table, his posture slightly more deferential than it had been for Mark. Mark followed the collective gaze, a flicker of irritation passing through him. He hated it when a bigger shark entered his waters. He expected to see some tech billionaire in a hoodie or a grizzled studio head. But what he saw sent a jolt through his system, a sudden, cold shock that sobered him instantly. It was Eleanor. But it wasn't the Eleanor he remembered. The Eleanor he had left wore her hair in a simple ponytail, favored sensible jeans, and rarely wore makeup. The woman walking through Aurelia was a different creature entirely. Her dark hair was styled in elegant, cascading waves. She wore a simple but exquisitely cut emerald green dress that clung to her frame, a frame that was stronger, more confident than he recalled. Her face, which he had once called pleasantly plain, was now striking, illuminated by a quiet radiance that seemed to come from within. He felt his throat tighten. It was like seeing a ghost, but a ghost that had come back from the dead, more vibrant and alive than ever before. "Who's that?" Tiffany asked, noticing his fixed stare. "Do you know her?" Mark couldn't answer for a moment. He was too busy processing the man she was with. He was older, perhaps in his late 40s, with distinguished silvering at his temples and an air of effortless authority. He wasn't Hollywood handsome, but he possessed a deep-set charisma and a calm, watchful intelligence. He wore a bespoke suit that probably cost more than Mark's monthly mortgage payment on his penthouse. As they passed, the man placed a gentle hand on the small of Elena's back, a gesture of easy intimacy that made Mark's stomach clench. They were seated at a table even better than his own, a secluded corner booth that offered both privacy and a commanding view of the entire restaurant. "Mark? You're staring," Tiffany said, her voice sharp with annoyance. "It's rude." "It's my ex-wife," he finally managed to say, the words feeling like gravel in his mouth. Tiffany's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up. She craned her neck to get a better look. "That's Elena." Wow, she cleaned up. The comment was meant to be a slight, a confirmation of her own superiority, but it landed like an insult to Mark. Cleaned up? It was an understatement of cosmic proportions. This wasn't a simple makeover, it was a complete transformation. This was a woman who was comfortable in her own skin, who belonged in a place like Aurelia. The quiet, unassuming woman he had divorced would have been terrified to even walk through these doors. His mind reeled, grasping for a logical explanation. Who was the man? An expensive date? A sugar daddy? Yes, that had to be it. Elena must have gotten lonely and found some rich old man to take care of her. He pictured her settlement money dwindling, her desperation growing. It was the only narrative that made sense, the only one that kept his own victory intact. Probably some rich client she's trying to impress, Mark said, trying to sound dismissive. She's still trying to get that little design business off the ground. But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. He watched as the man, whose name he now desperately wanted to know, spoke to Eleanor. He wasn't just talking, he was listening. He was leaning in, his gaze focused entirely on her, his expression a mixture of admiration and deep affection. And Eleanor, she was laughing, not the polite little titter he was used to, but a genuine, unrestrained laugh that made her eyes sparkle. He hadn't heard her laugh like that in years. He realized with a sickening lurch that he had been the reason she stopped laughing that way. The waiter arrived with their appetizers. The intricate plate of foie gras, which moments ago had seemed like the pinnacle of indulgence, now looked grotesque. The tower of caviar, with its mother-of-pearl spoons and blinnies, seemed absurd. Mark's appetite had completely vanished, replaced by a cold, hollow feeling in the pit of his stomach. He was supposed to be the winner. This was his celebration, but the ghost of his past had just walked in, and for the first time in a very long year, Mark Thorne began to suspect that he had lost something far more valuable than he had ever understood. The next hour was a masterclass in torture for Mark. He tried to engage with Tiffany, to listen to her chatter about an upcoming influencer trip to Bali and the drama with her frenemy, Jessica. He nodded and made the appropriate murmurs of agreement, but his attention was a taut string, pulled inexorably towards the corner booth. He became an unwilling spy, cataloguing every detail of the scene unfolding just 50 feet away. He watched as the man, let's call him Silver Fox, Mark thought venomously, poured Elena a glass of wine. He watched as they shared a dish, their movements easy and synchronized. He watched the way Elena's hands moved when she spoke, carving shapes in the air as she described something with passion. He remembered those hands, usually covered in charcoal dust or paint smudges from her hobbies. Now they were animated, expressive, a conductor's hands leading the orchestra of her new life. What were they talking about? His mind raced. Her! It had to be about her! The man was clearly besotted. Mark dissected their interaction, searching for clues, for flaws. He looked for the telltale signs of a transactional relationship, the bored expression of a kept woman, the possessive grip of a benefactor. He found none. What he saw was a partnership. He saw respect. He saw the way the man's eyes crinkled at the corners when Eleanor smiled. He saw the way she would occasionally reach across the table and touch his hand. A simple, grounding gesture of connection. These were not the actions of a woman trying to secure a benefactor. This was real. The realization landed like a punch to the gut. "She looks happy," Tiffany commented, her tone laced with a strange mix of curiosity and accusation. She had been watching him watch Eleanor, and her patience was clearly wearing thin. "It's an act," Mark snapped, more harshly than he intended. "She's probably playing him. Eleanor was always good at playing the victim." Was she? He tried to recall an instance, any instance, of Eleanor being manipulative. He couldn't. What he remembered was her asking for his time, for his attention, for him to be present. He had framed those requests as neediness, as her trying to hold him back from his work. Now, seeing her with this man, he saw it for what it was: a desire for partnership, a partnership he had been unwilling or unable to provide. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, surfaced. It was their 8th anniversary. He had completely forgotten. He came home late, exhausted from a 14-hour day of hostile negotiations. The house was dark, except for the dining room, where Elena was sitting at a fully set table with 2 plates of cold, uneaten steak and a single flickering candle. "I tried to call," she had said, her voice small and tight. "My phone was off. We were in a lockdown meeting," he'd replied, loosening his tie, his mind still on spreadsheets and profit margins. "What's all this?" "It's our anniversary, Mark." He felt a flash of annoyance, not guilt. It was just another demand on his time, another expectation he had failed to meet. "Elena, I am building a future for us. Do you have any idea the pressure I'm under? I can't be expected to remember every little date." "It's not a little date," she had whispered, and he saw the glint of tears in her eyes. "It's our life." He had brushed it off, told her they'd celebrate on the weekend, which they never did. He had chosen the deal over the dinner, the future over the present. Looking back at her now, sitting across from a man who looked at her like she was the only person in a room full of stars, Mark realized he had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He hadn't been building a future for them. He had been building a future for himself, and she was just an inconvenient part of the overhead. The waiter approached Eleanor and her companion. He was holding a bottle of champagne, Dom Perignon, Mark noted with a bitter eye. The waiter spoke quietly to the man, who simply nodded. It wasn't for their table. The waiter, followed by Jean-Pierre, carried the champagne and 2 flutes not to their table, but to the center of it. Something was happening. A low murmur rippled through the restaurant. People were starting to notice. The man at the corner table stood up. He was tall, composed, and his eyes never left Elena's. Tiffany leaned forward, her earlier annoyance replaced by rapt attention. "What is going on?" Mark didn't answer. He couldn't. His blood had turned to ice. He had a sudden, premonitory dread, a terrifying certainty about what was about to happen. He felt like a man on a cliff's edge, the ground crumbling beneath his feet, forced to watch the one thing he thought he'd thrown away become someone else's priceless treasure. The man. Julian Devereux. Mark knew his name now. A quick, frantic search on his phone under the table had revealed everything. Stood beside their table. He wasn't just some rich old man. He was Julian Devereux, the reclusive founder and CEO of Ethelred Technologies, a pioneer in sustainable AI. He was a legitimate billionaire, not just finance-rich like Mark, but world-changingly wealthy. He was a philanthropist, an art collector, and according to a fawning Forbes article, one of the most brilliant minds of his generation. The narrative of the desperate sugar baby evaporated in a puff of humiliating smoke. Julian didn't make a grand spectacle. He didn't tap his glass or call for attention. He didn't need to. The quiet power he exuded was enough. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away as he turned his full attention to Elena. "Elena," he began, his voice low but clear, carrying across the hushed room. "From the moment I met you, you challenged me. I came to you looking for a designer to create a space, and you showed me how to build a home. I thought I understood art, but you taught me to see the beauty in structure, in light, and in the quiet strength of things that are built to last." Mark felt his skin prickle. Built to last. The phrase was a dagger. He had built his life on acquisitions and disposals, on short-term gains and ruthless efficiency. He had treated his own marriage the same way. Julian continued, his gaze locked on Eleanor, who was looking up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning joy. You walked into my life when it was all blueprints and balance sheets, and you filled it with color and warmth and laughter. You are the most passionate, resilient, and brilliant woman I have ever known. You took the broken pieces of a life you were handed and built an empire of your own. An empire of her own? What did that mean? Mark's mind was short-circuiting. Then, with a grace that was utterly devastating, Julian Devereux lowered himself onto one knee. A collective gasp swept through Aurelia. Tiffany's hand flew to her mouth. Mark felt like he couldn't breathe, as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the room and funneled directly to that corner booth. From his pocket, Julian produced a small velvet box. He opened it. Even from across the room, the ring was blinding. It wasn't a gaudy explosion of diamonds like the one Mark had given Tiffany. It was a single, flawless, emerald-cut diamond flanked by two smaller sapphires, a piece that was as elegant and unique as the woman it was intended for. It looked like a museum piece. "Elena Vance," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have redesigned my world. Would you do me the incredible honor of designing our future together? Will you marry me?" For a moment that stretched into an eternity, there was absolute silence. Mark's heart hammered against his ribs, a desperate, traitorous part of him praying she would say no, that this was all some elaborate joke. Elena's face was a canvas of emotion. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she was smiling, a smile so radiant it could have powered the city below. She nodded, unable to speak, and then finally found her voice, a clear, ringing, "Yes. Yes, Julian. Of course, yes." The restaurant erupted. The hushed, sophisticated diners broke into spontaneous, heartfelt applause. People were smiling. Some were dabbing their eyes. It was a perfect cinematic moment, and Mark Thorne had a front-row seat to his own personal apocalypse. Julian slid the magnificent ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. He stood, pulling her to her feet and into an embrace that was both passionate and tender. The applause swelled. "Well," Tiffany said, her voice dripping with a poison Mark had never heard from her before. "I guess she won." The words hit him harder than any physical blow. She won. It wasn't a competition. Or was it? In his mind, it always had been. The divorce was his victory lap. He had freed himself from a boring life and a woman who couldn't keep up. He had upgraded. But as he watched Eleanor, now wearing a billionaire's ring, being toasted with champagne by the entire restaurant, a woman so clearly adored and respected, he saw the sickening truth. He hadn't upgraded. He had been the starter marriage. He was the prequel, the backstory, the chapter she had to get through to reach her real life. He was the man who had owned a lottery ticket and thrown it in the trash, only to watch someone else find it and claim the billion-dollar prize. The waiter arrived with their main courses. Mark looked down at his plate of Wagyu steak, its perfect cross-hatching and artful garnish, a mockery of his shattered ego. He felt a wave of nausea. He had never felt so utterly, comprehensively defeated in his entire life. As Julian and a beaming Elena finally made their way out of the restaurant, stopping to accept congratulations from a few well-wishers, Mark remained frozen in his chair. He watched them go, watched the door swing shut behind them, leaving him in a world that had been irrevocably tilted on its axis. The applause had died down, and the ambient chatter of Aurelia had resumed. But for Mark, the silence was deafening. He picked up his fork, the heavy silver feeling alien in his hand, and pushed a piece of steak around his plate. The victory dinner was now awake. So, Tiffany began, her voice cold and sharp, breaking the silence between them. Are you going to sit there looking like your dog just died all night, or are you going to pretend to be on a date with me? Mark flinched. It was just a shock, that's all. A shock? She scoffed, taking a vicious bite of her lobster thermidor. Mark, you looked like you were watching a live execution. Your own. I've never seen you look so small. The word small was a precision strike. It was the very thing he accused Elena of being, the thing he had prided himself on escaping. To have it thrown back at him by the woman who was supposed to be the symbol of his larger-than-life new world was galling. Don't be ridiculous, Tiffany. I'm happy for her. The lie was so thin it was transparent. Oh, please, she sneered, putting her fork down. The pretense was over. Happy for her? You were practically vibrating with jealousy. The whole time she was here, you didn't look at me once. Not once. I was just scenery for your little soap opera. Tell me, did you enjoy the show? That's not fair, he mumbled, but his defense was weak, pathetic. Isn't it? She pressed on, her voice rising slightly, drawing a discreet glance from a nearby table. You told me she was this mousy, insecure woman you had to escape from. You said she had no ambition, that she was holding you back. That woman who just walked out of here didn't look like she was being held back. She looked like she was about to own the world. And you know what? It looked like she was doing it without giving you a single thought. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing his ego. Tiffany wasn't just angry, she was dissecting him, and her analysis was brutally accurate. You're obsessed with her, Tiffany declared, her eyes narrowing. This whole year I thought we were building something. But we weren't, were we? I was just a placeholder. I was the not Elena. Younger, blonder, more fun. I was your revenge. But it turns out she's the one getting the revenge, without even trying. And you can't stand it. He wanted to deny it, to rage at her, but the truth of her words silenced him. He had used Tiffany. He hadn't seen it that way, of course. He had told himself he was in love, or at least in lust, with her energy, her beauty. But now, under the harsh fluorescent lights of his own humiliation, he saw his motivations with sickening clarity. Tiffany was a bandage for a wound he never even knew he had. And now, the wound had been torn wide open. I think I'm losing my appetite, Tiffany said, pushing her plate away. She grabbed her purse, a ridiculously expensive Chanel clutch that Mark had bought her last month. The man she's with? Julian Devereux. I just looked him up. He's worth $12 billion, Mark. Billion, with a B. He funds cancer research and builds schools in Africa. What do? You buy and strip companies for parts. The comparison was cruel and designed to wound. It succeeded perfectly. You said you were the upgrade, the winner, she continued, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. But from where I'm sitting, it looks like she traded in a used Honda for a private jet. And you're left here, paying the bill for a dinner you can't even eat. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the polished floor. Call me when you're over your ex-wife. Or better yet, don't. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking an angry rhythm of departure. She didn't look back. Mark was left alone at the table for two, with 2 half-eaten main courses and the full, crushing weight of his own monumental stupidity. Jean-Pierre glided over, his expression a mask of professional sympathy. Is everything all right, Mr. Thorne? Mark looked at the concerned maître d'aides, at the pitying glances from the surrounding tables, at the ghost of a celebration on his own table. Just bring me the check, he said, his voice raspy, and the strongest scotch you have. He had come to Aurelia to toast his victory. He was leaving utterly vanquished, not by an enemy, but by the undeniable radiant success of the woman he had been so certain he had left behind in the dust. The silence in Mark's penthouse apartment was a physical presence. It was a sleek, minimalist space, all chrome, glass, and shades of grey. A place designed to impress, not to comfort. He'd always seen it as a symbol of his success, a stark contrast to the cluttered, cosy warmth of the house he'd shared with Eleanor. Tonight, for the first time, it felt like a mausoleum. Cold, empty, and haunted. The tumbler of Macallan 25 in his hand did little to dull the throbbing in his skull. He had abandoned his Porsche to a valet and taken a taxi home, unable to bear the thought of being alone with his own triumphant purring engine. He sank onto a low-slung Italian leather sofa and opened his laptop. His fingers, usually so quick and decisive on the keyboard as they orchestrated corporate takeovers, felt clumsy. He typed Elena Vance into the search bar. During their marriage, a search for her name would have brought up nothing. A tagged photo on his Facebook page from a company holiday party, perhaps. A link to a 5K charity run she'd participated in. Nothing of substance. She had been, in the digital world as in his own, an extension of him. The results that now flooded his screen told a different story. The first hit was an article in Architectural Digest. The headline read, "Vance Interiors. Elena Vance is redefining intimate spaces with empathy and innovation." His breath caught in his throat. Vance Interiors. She had used her own name. She hadn't taken his last name off the door. She'd built a new door with her name on it. He clicked the link. The article was a glowing profile, complete with stunning photographs of her recent projects. A boutique hotel in Santa Barbara that was a masterpiece of coastal chic, a tech startup's headquarters in Silicon Beach designed to foster creativity, and a private residence in the Hollywood Hills that was both breathtakingly modern and deeply personal. The descriptions of her work used words like visionary, soulful, and transformative. There was a picture of Eleanor, standing in one of the spaces she'd designed. She was smiling, not at the camera, but at something out of frame, a look of profound satisfaction on her face. She looked like an artist in her element. The article quoted a client. Elena doesn't just decorate a room. She listens to the story of the people who will live in it and translates that story into a physical space. She gave us back a piece of ourselves we didn't even know we'd lost. He felt a fresh wave of nausea. He remembered her sketches, the ones he'd told her to clean up off the dining table. He had seen them as a mess. The world, it turned out, saw them as genius. He kept digging. He found the Vance Interiors website. It was professional, elegant, and featured a portfolio that was undeniably impressive. Her About page was a short, powerful biography. It mentioned her lifelong passion for design and her formal training, a degree she'd earned before they met, a fact he'd almost forgotten. It didn't mention him at all. His decade in her life was a blank space, an edited-out chapter. Then he searched for her and Julian Devereaux. They were a philanthropic power couple. They had co-chaired a recent fundraising gala for the LA County Museum of Art. There were pictures of them on the red carpet, Elena in a stunning gown, looking every bit Julian's equal. An article in a society column described them as the city's most elegant and understated couple, noting their shared passion for art and social causes. The article detailed how they met. Julian Devereaux had hired Vance Interiors to design the new West Coast headquarters for Ethelred Technologies. He had been so impressed by her vision and professionalism that he had sought her out personally. Their relationship had blossomed from a foundation of mutual professional respect. Mark slammed the laptop shut. It wasn't a sugar daddy situation. It wasn't a lucky break. It was earned. She had built this. She had taken the settlement money he had considered a generous parting gift to keep her quiet and comfortable, and she had invested it in herself. She had built the business she always dreamed of, the one he had actively, if passively, discouraged. He had been the anchor weighing her down, and the moment he cut the rope, she hadn't sunk. She had soared. The full, horrifying scope of his miscalculation crashed down on him. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost a partner he never even knew he had. The quiet, unambitious woman he'd left behind possessed a drive and talent that dwarfed his own ruthless corporate climbing. He chased money. She created beauty. He stripped assets. She built legacies. He thought of Tiffany's final, brutal words. She traded in a used Honda for a private jet. He looked around his cold, silent penthouse, a monument to his own brand of success. It was a space designed by a famous, expensive architect who had never bothered to ask him a single personal question. It was a collection of expensive objects, a sterile display of wealth. It wasn't a home. He suddenly, desperately, missed the clutter. He missed the smell of oil paints from her small studio corner. He missed the stacks of design magazines on the coffee table. He missed the woman who had tried, time and time again, to build a home with him, while he was busy building an empire for one. The scotch in his glass offered no comfort. It only tasted of regret, a bitter, burning trail all the way down. A week passed. It was the longest, most miserable week of Mark's life. He went to work, but his focus was shattered. During meetings, he'd find his mind drifting, picturing Elena laughing with Julian Devereux. He stared at complex financial models, but all he saw was the brilliant sapphire on her finger. His colleagues noticed his distraction, his new, sour mood. The aura of the invincible corporate raider had been replaced by the pallor of a man haunted. Tiffany, true to her word, hadn't called. She had blocked his number. Her Instagram, once a shrine to their fabulous life together, was now scrubbed of all but a few of his photos. She was already moving on, rebranding her narrative. He was yesterday's news. Loneliness, an emotion Mark had always associated with weakness, became his constant companion. The silence of his penthouse was no longer just quiet. It was accusatory. Every gleaming surface seemed to reflect his own pathetic image back at him. One night, after a bottle of wine that did nothing to numb the ache in his chest, he found himself scrolling through the old photos on his cloud storage. He bypassed the recent years of lavish vacations with Tiffany and went further back, to the beginning, to Elena. There were photos of them in their first tiny apartment, painting the walls themselves. A picture of her looking proudly at the first real piece of furniture she had saved up for and restored. A photo of them on a hiking trip, her face free of makeup, smiling at him with an open, uncomplicated love that now felt like a physical blow. This was the woman he had loved, before he had decided she wasn't enough. Before he had broken her, or so he thought. He came across a video from her 30th birthday. He had thrown her a surprise party in their backyard. In the video, she was surrounded by her friends, her face alight with pure joy as they brought out a cake. She caught his eye from across the yard and blew him a kiss, a look of such profound love and gratitude on her face. Watching it now, he felt a sob rise in his throat, thick and painful. What had he done? How could he have thrown that away? Driven by a desperate, wine-fueled cocktail of nostalgia and self-pity, he did the one thing he knew he shouldn't. He picked up his phone and found her number. He stared at the name Elena for a long time before his thumbs started moving, typing out a message born of weakness and ego. "Hey, saw you at Aurelia last week. You looked happy. Congrats. Reminded me of the old days. Remember that little Italian place on Millwood we used to go to? I was thinking about that tonight." He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The message was a pathetic, transparent attempt to claw his way back into her narrative. He was trying to remind her of a shared history, to imply a connection that he himself had severed. He wasn't sure what he wanted. For her to say she missed it too? For her to feel a pang of nostalgia? He just wanted a reaction. He wanted to know he still existed in her world. He waited, his heart pounding. The delivered receipt appeared. He stared at the screen, waiting for the 3 little dots of a reply to materialize. Minutes turned into an hour. Then 2. He fell into a restless, alcohol-laced sleep on the sofa, his phone clutched in his hand. He woke with a start near 3 a.m., his neck stiff, his head pounding. He fumbled for his phone, his screen blindingly bright in the dark room. There was a reply, a single notification. His heart leaped. He unlocked the phone and read the message. It wasn't long. It wasn't angry or sentimental. It was something far worse. It was final. "Mark, I appreciate you reaching out, but my past is not a place I visit anymore. The happiness you saw is real, and it's built on a future I am excited about. I have a new favorite Italian place now. I wish you well." That was it. I wish you well. The 4 most polite, devastatingly indifferent words in the English language. There was no anger, no lingering resentment, no opening for further conversation. It was the clean, crisp, professional closing of a door. She wasn't holding a grudge. She wasn't playing games. She simply, truly, did not care anymore. He was a closed file, a finished project. He read the message again and again, the words blurring through the haze of his hangover and his heartbreak. "I have a new favorite Italian place now." The simple sentence was a brutal metaphor. She had a new life, a new love, new memories that were overwriting the ones he had so carelessly tried to evoke. He had wanted a reaction, and he had gotten one. He had confirmed that he did still exist in her world, but only as a distant, irrelevant memory. He was the ghost at the feast, and she had politely, firmly exorcised him. He dropped the phone on the cushion beside him and stared into the darkness of his empty, silent life. The taste of victory had long since turned to ash in his mouth. The seasons changed. The blistering heat of the LA summer gave way to a mild, indifferent autumn. For Mark, the change was internal. The frantic desperation of the weeks following the encounter at Aurelia had cooled into a dull, persistent ache of regret. He had stopped drinking excessively. He went to work, he went to the gym, he went through the motions of his life. But the swagger was gone. The predatory gleam in his eye had been replaced by a weary sadness. He existed in a state of self-imposed exile. He avoided the glitzy restaurants and bars he used to frequent, terrified of another accidental sighting. His world, which had once felt limitlessly expansive, had shrunk to the size of his own solitude. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, he was killing time at an airport newsstand before a business flight to Chicago. He was scanning the rows of magazines, his eyes glazing over the covers featuring smiling celebrities and bold headlines about success and scandal. And then he saw her. It wasn't a small photo in a society column. It was the cover of Forbes magazine. It was a powerful, beautifully shot photograph. Elena stood, not in a glamorous gown, but in tailored trousers and a silk blouse, looking directly into the camera. She wasn't smiling a pretty, placating smile. Her expression was one of calm confidence and intelligence. Beside her, with his hand resting proudly on her shoulder, was Julian Devereux. They looked like a team, a formidable partnership. The headline in bold yellow letters was splashed across the bottom of the image. The Power of Purpose. Julian Devereux and Elena Vance on building a better future in business and in life. Mark felt the blood drain from his face. He picked up the magazine, his hands trembling slightly. He flipped it open to the cover story. It was an extensive 10-page spread detailing Julian's revolutionary work in sustainable technology and, to Mark's astonishment, Elena's meteoric rise in the world of architectural design. The article hailed Vance Interiors as the most sought-after design firm on the West Coast, praising its commitment to sustainable materials and human-centric design principles. It spoke of her multi-million-dollar contracts to design entire corporate campuses and luxury eco-resorts. It wasn't a hobby. It was an empire. Her empire. There was a section about their personal life, their shared philanthropic foundation, the Devereux Vance Initiative, which was funding arts education in underserved communities. There was a quote from Julian about his fiancée. "Eleanor is the most formidable person I know," the magazine quoted. "I am a man who deals in data and logic, but she has a fundamental understanding of the human soul, and she has the rare ability to make that understanding tangible, to build it into the world around us. She is my partner in every sense of the word. My life's work truly began when I met her." Mark had to lean against the magazine rack for support. He read the words over and over. My life's work truly began when I met her. He thought of his own words to her, years ago. My career has to be the priority. Your dreams are a distraction. He had seen her as an accessory to his life, a supporting character. And all along, she had been the protagonist of a story he was too arrogant and blind to even read. The article ended with a quote from Eleanor herself. The interviewer had asked her about her journey, about starting her own business later in life. I think for a long time, Elena said, her words printed in elegant italics, I lived a life that was designed by someone else. It was a perfectly nice life, but the foundations weren't my own. The turning point came when I realized that I had to be my own architect. You have to be willing to tear down a structure that isn't working, even if it's frightening, to build something true and beautiful in its place. My only regret is that I didn't pick up the hammer sooner. Mark closed the magazine. Her words weren't aimed at him. They were a reflection of her own journey. But they struck him with the force of a final judgment. He had been the structure that wasn't working, and she had torn him down, not out of malice, but out of a necessary act of creation. He bought the magazine, paid the cashier in a daze, and walked towards his gate. He sat down in the sterile airport lounge, surrounded by strangers, and felt a profound and terrifying loneliness. He was Mark Thorne, a senior partner at a major firm, a man who had everything he thought he wanted. He was wealthy, successful, and utterly, completely alone. He looked at the cover one last time, at the woman he had underestimated, the woman he had discarded, now looking out at the world from the cover of Forbes magazine. She wasn't his ex-wife anymore. She was Elena Vance, and he was just a man at an airport, a ghost from a past she had beautifully, masterfully renovated without him. The seasons turned, each one leaving a new layer of frost on Mark's soul. Autumn arrived, and the crisp, golden days felt like a mockery of his own decay. He watched from his penthouse window as families walked in the park below, their laughter a distant, alien sound. Then came winter. The holidays, once a season for lavish parties and ostentatious gift-giving with Tiffany, were now a silent, cavernous void. He spent Christmas Eve alone, eating takeout sushi on his marble countertop, the city lights twinkling outside with a festive cheer that felt personally insulting. Spring bloomed, but for Mark there was no renewal, only the monotonous continuation of his self-inflicted sentence. His life, once a high-speed ascent, had plateaued and was now in a slow, undeniable decline. The razor-sharp focus that had made him a legend at Thorn Capital was gone, replaced by a dull, persistent static of regret. He would sit in high-stakes boardroom meetings, staring at profit and loss statements, but the numbers would blur into Elena's face. He'd hear a senior partner outlining a strategy for a hostile takeover, and his mind would drift to the sound of her genuine, unrestrained laughter at Aurelia. One afternoon, during a critical negotiation, he missed a key question directed at him. The silence stretched, pregnant and awkward, until a junior analyst, a kid barely out of business school, jumped in to answer, saving the moment from complete collapse. Mark saw the look on his boss's face, a fleeting mixture of disappointment and concern. The invincible Mark Thorne, the shark, was wounded, and the other sharks in the water were beginning to smell blood. This business trip to Chicago was a penance, a chance to salvage a deal that was faltering due to his own recent neglect. As he walked through the bustling terminal at LAX, he felt like an imposter in his own expensive suit. He was a ghost haunting the life he had built, a life that now felt as hollow and impersonal as the airport lounge he was sitting in. To avoid the torment of his own thoughts, he made his way to a newsstand, a wall of glossy promises and aspirational lifestyles. He reached for his usual, the Wall Street Journal, seeking the comfort of familiar financial jargon. As he turned to pay, his eyes swept over the main display rack, and the world stopped. It wasn't a small photo in a society column. It was the cover of Forbes magazine, arguably the most respected business publication in the world. It was a powerful, beautifully shot photograph. Elena stood, not in a glamorous gown, but in tailored trousers and a silk blouse, her hands resting on a set of architectural plans spread across a large oak table. She was looking directly into the camera, and her expression was one of profound, earned authority. Beside her stood Julian Devereux, his hand resting proudly on her shoulder, his gaze also fixed on the lens. They weren't posed like a romantic couple. They were posed as partners, as equals, a formidable team about to reshape the world. The headline, in bold yellow letters, was splashed across the bottom of the image. The Power of Purpose. Julian Devereux and Elena Vance on building a better future in business and in life. Mark felt the air leave his lungs. His hand, holding the journal, trembled. He placed it back on the rack as if it were burning him and numbly picked up the Forbes. His face, pale and drawn, was reflected faintly in the glossy cover, a ghostly superposition over their image of triumph. He bought the magazine, the transaction a blur, and found a secluded seat at his gate. With unsteady fingers, he opened it to the cover story. It was an extensive 10-page spread. He began to read, and every paragraph was a new, fresh hell. The article hailed Vance Interiors as the most sought-after design firm on the West Coast, detailing not just her aesthetic vision, but her revolutionary business model built on sustainable materials and ethical labor practices. It mentioned she had recently been awarded a prestigious Guggenheim Fellowship for her research into human-centric environmental design. Mark felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. He remembered a weekend she had spent building an intricate model of a community center out of recycled cardboard and reclaimed wood. He had called it her Little Arts and Crafts project. It had been the foundation for a Guggenheim Fellowship, The profile was filled with glowing testimonials. A Silicon Valley CEO praised how her office redesign had increased employee productivity and well-being by 40%. A world-famous actress spoke about how Eleanor hadn't just designed her house, but had created a sanctuary that healed her soul. Then came the section on their philanthropic work. The Devereux Vance Initiative was funding a multi-million-dollar program to build and design state-of-the-art arts and science wings for public schools in low-income neighborhoods. There was a quote from Julian about his fiancée. "Elena is the most formidable person I know," the magazine quoted. "I am a man who deals in data and logic, but she has a fundamental understanding of the human soul, and she has the rare ability to make that understanding tangible, to build it into the world around us. People think I gave her opportunities, but the truth is, she gave me a purpose beyond profit. She is my partner in every sense of the word. My life's work truly began when I met her." Mark had to close his eyes. He thought of his own words to her, years ago, after he'd found her crying over a rejected proposal for a community project. "Elena, you have to be realistic. My career makes the money that allows you to have these hobbies. Let's focus on what's important." He had defined what was important, and he had been so wrong. The article's final paragraphs were an interview with Eleanor herself. The journalist asked about the courage it took to start over. "I think for a long time," Eleanor's words read, elegant and incisive on the page, "I lived a life that was designed by someone else. It was a perfectly nice life, on paper, but the foundations weren't my own, and the rooms felt small, confining. The turning point came when I realized that I had to be my own architect. You have to be willing to tear down a structure that isn't working, even if it's the only home you've ever known, to build something true and beautiful in its place. It's the most terrifying and liberating act in the world. My only regret is that I didn't pick up the hammer sooner." He let the magazine fall into his lap. "I didn't pick up the hammer sooner. He was the structure that wasn't working. He was the small, confining room. And she hadn't just torn it down. She had salvaged the materials of her own spirit and built a cathedral." His flight was called. He walked onto the plane in a stupor, the magazine tucked into his briefcase, its weight feeling like a slab of granite. He found his first-class seat and collapsed into it. The flight attendant, seeing his ashen face, offered him a pre-flight glass of champagne. "No, thank you," he heard himself say, his voice thin. "Just water." As the plane ascended, banking over the vast, glittering sprawl of Los Angeles, Mark looked out the window. He saw the city lights, the same lights he had looked down upon from Aurelia with such smug satisfaction. Then he had felt like a king. Now he understood. He had just been a man with a good view of a world he was never truly a part of. He was flying to Chicago to save a business deal, to fight for a few more dollars in a life that was utterly bankrupt of meaning. And somewhere down below, in that city of lights, the woman he had thrown away was building a better world, one beautiful, truthful room at a time. And so, Mark Thorne learned the hardest lesson of all. The grass isn't always greener, especially when you fail to water your own lawn. He spent years believing he was the prize, only to discover he was the price Elena had to pay to finally claim her own worth. Her true happiness wasn't found in a billionaire's ring, but in the self-worth she rediscovered when she was finally free. Her success was the consequence of his failure, a life built from the rubble of a past he destroyed. This story is a powerful reminder that sometimes letting go isn't an ending, but the most important beginning of all. What do you think? Was this the ultimate karma? Have you ever witnessed someone's life improve dramatically after leaving a relationship that held them back? Let me know your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel for more real-life drama and stories of incredible transformation. Thank you for listening. What happens when your life implodes in front of the world? Eliza Sterling, divorced, forgotten, and humiliated by her billionaire ex-husband on the biggest red carpet of the year. In front of flashing cameras, his new wife drenched her in red wine, and he told her she didn't belong. But they forgot one thing. They forgot who her father was. In the next 30 seconds, a single speech wouldn't just change the spotlight. It would change the entire power structure of New York City. This isn't a fairy tale. This is the story of how a single night of ultimate shame became the beginning of the most ruthless revenge. Eliza Sterling zipped the black body bag closed, the finality of the sound echoing in the cavernous silence of her Tribeca art studio. Inside the bag wasn't a person, but a canvas, a portrait of a woman dissolving into a vortex of swirling, chaotic colors. She called it the erasure. It was, she admitted, a bit on the nose. For the past 18 months, since the ink had dried on the most talked-about divorce in New York financial circles, Eliza had felt herself being erased. She had gone from Mrs. Damian Vance, wife of the tech wunderkind Billionaire, to just Eliza. In the ruthless taxonomy of Manhattan society, she was a footnote. Damian Vance, her ex-husband, had seen to that. Their marriage had been a 10-year masterclass in diminishing returns. He had loved her ambition when they were young, when Vance Tech was just a dream sketched on a napkin in a Harvard dorm. She, with her quiet, terrifyingly sharp mind, and a double major in art history and business administration from Wharton, had helped him build the scaffolding of his empire. Then the empire grew, and she did not. Or rather, he preferred her to shrink. "Eliza, darling," he'd say, his voice a smooth baritone that charmed boardrooms and investors. "Why stress over spreadsheets? You have such a wonderful eye for art. Go decorate. Go paint." So she did. She had painted and decorated and hosted his dinners and smiled at his investors, all while he slowly, methodically, chiseled away at her confidence, her connections, and finally, her identity. When he'd announced he was leaving her for Isabella Rossi, a 22-year-old influencer whose entire brand was aspirational wealth, the divorce settlement was swift and brutal. He called it generous. She called it hush money. It was just enough to be comfortable, but not enough to ever be a threat. Tonight was the Vanguard Legacy Gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was the absolute pinnacle of the social calendar, a night where old money, like her family, and new tech, like Damian, collided. Eliza hadn't been invited for years, not since Damian had taken control of their social lives. But this year, her old friend, Chloe Beaumont, who now sat on the museum's acquisitions board, had procured her a single ticket. "It's time, Elle," Chloe had insisted over the phone. "You're a brilliant artist. People are starting to notice your work. But you can't stay hidden in that studio forever. You need to be seen." Eliza looked at the dress hanging on her studio mannequin. It wasn't a Chanel or a Dior or any of the labels Damian had once insisted she wear. It was her own creation. A column of pure, white, sculptural silk, hand-painted with a delicate silver leaf motif of a phoenix's wing. It was her art. It was her one chance to reintroduce herself to the world, not as Damien Vance's discarded wife, but as Eliza Sterling, artist. A vibration rattled her workbench. A text from a number she still hadn't deleted. Her father's assistant. Mr. Sterling's car is 3 blocks from your location. He requests you meet him in the lobby. Eliza's blood ran cold. He? Here? Now. Arthur Sterling. The name landed like a block of granite. If Damien Vance was a river of new, fast-moving money, Arthur Sterling was the entire mountain range from which it flowed. He was the reclusive, iron-willed patriarch of Sterling Enterprises, a multi-generational, $80 billion conglomerate that dealt in everything from global shipping to rare minerals. He was also the man who hadn't spoken more than 10 words to her since her wedding day. "He's a parasite, Eliza," Arthur had said, his voice cold and flat in his Fifth Avenue study the day she'd announced her engagement. "This Vance boy, he's a taker. He will drain you, and when you are empty, he will discard you." "You don't know him, Father. We're building something," she had cried. "No," Arthur had said, turning back to the stock ticker on his screen. "He is building something. You are his first acquisition." He had been right, and the shame of that, the burning, bitter shame of his accuracy, had been a chasm between them ever in. She grabbed her clutch, her hands shaking. Why tonight? Why, after all this time, was he here? She walked to the freight elevator, her heels clicking on the concrete floor. The white dress felt less like a statement and more like a shroud. She was terrified. Not of the gala, not of Damien, but of the cold, disappointed gaze of the one man whose approval she had always craved and never, ever received. The air outside the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a kinetic storm of flashing white lights and shouted names. The roar of the crowd pressed against the velvet ropes was a physical force. Eliza stepped out of her father's obsidian-black Rolls-Royce. He had, of course, not come, sending the car as a silent, loaded gesture, and immediately felt her lungs tighten. She had forgotten what this felt like. The sheer, overwhelming scale of the event. Hundreds of photographers, packed 20 deep, bellowed for the A-listers. "Gigi! Kendall! Mr. Chalamet! Over here!" Eliza Sterling, in her beautiful but labelless white dress, was invisible. She was a ghost walking among gods. She took a breath, clutched her silver bag, and stepped onto the crimson carpet. The first few reporters she passed barely glanced at her. Their eyes were scanning over her shoulder for the next big arrival. She heard one mutter to another. "Who is that?" "PR." Then, a familiar, saccharine voice cut through the din. "Eliza? Eliza Vance? Oh, wait. It's Sterling now, isn't it?" Eliza froze. Veronica Finch, the most venomous gossip columnist for the New York Post, was standing right in front of her, microphone extended like a dagger. "Hello, Veronica," Eliza said, forcing a tight smile. "We haven't seen you in an age, darling," Veronica purred, her eyes raking over Eliza's dress. "How brave to wear your own design. Tell me, what's it like being back? It must be so hard, seeing the old crowd." "It's a wonderful night for the museum," Eliza replied, her voice flatter than she'd intended. Yes, of course." Veronica's smile was all teeth. "And speaking of the old crowd..." A fresh wave of flashes erupted at the end of the carpet. A black and silver Bugatti had pulled up. The crowd surged. Damien Vance emerged, looking impossibly handsome in a bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo. He turned and offered his hand. Out stepped Isabella Rossi. She was a vision of intentional excess, poured into a glittering, near-naked gown by Balmain that left nothing to the imagination. She was 22, flawless, and she radiated the kind of blinding confidence that only comes from knowing you are the most looked-at person in the room. They were the couple. The photographers went insane. "Damien! Isabella! The power couple!" Eliza tried to move past, to slip into the museum unnoticed, but Veronica Finch deftly stepped, blocking her path. "Oh, but you must say hello." It was too late. Damien had seen her. His perfect, media-trained smile faltered for a fraction of a second, replaced by something cold and appraising. He guided Isabella toward her, a predator sensing an opportunity. "Eliza," he said, his voice loud enough for the reporters nearby to hear, "I'm surprised to see you here. I didn't think this was your scene anymore." "Hello, Damien." "Isabella." Eliza nodded, her insides turning to ice. Isabella giggled, a high, tinkling sound. She stepped forward, her arms wide, as if to hug her. "Eliza, sweetie. Oh my God, I love your dress. It's so quaint. Did you make it yourself?" And then it happened. It was so fast, so perfectly executed, it could have been choreography. Isabella tripped on the hem of her own gown. Her hand, which was holding a full flute of deep, ruby-red champagne, a prop surely for the cameras, flew forward. The entire glass of red wine arced through the air and emptied itself down the front of Eliza's pristine, white, silk-painted dress. A collective, horrified gasp sucked the air from the carpet. The red wine bled into the white silk, obliterating the delicate phoenix wing. It looked like a wound, a fatal, gushing wound. Isabella brought her hands to her mouth. "Oh my God, Eliza, I am so sorry." Her eyes, however, were dancing with unconcealed, vicious glee. Eliza just stood there, frozen. The world narrowed to the dark, spreading stain and the sound of 1,000 cameras clicking, capturing the single worst moment of her life. Click, 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 flash, click. Veronica Finch's microphone was practically in her mouth. "Eliza, your reaction. How do you feel?" Eliza couldn't speak. She was drowning. Damien Vance stepped forward. He placed a proprietary hand on Isabella's back, pulling her away from the mess. He looked at Eliza, at the ruined dress, at her pale, trembling face. He leaned in, his voice a low, confidential whisper that was just loud enough for the surrounding boom mics to catch. "Some things never change, Eliza," he said, his tone one of mock pity. "You're always in over your head. You try so hard, but you simply don't belong here." He shook his head, gave a small, sad sigh for the cameras, and then steered his new, perfect wife past her. "Come on, darling. Let's not let this ruin our night." They swept past her and up the grand staircase, leaving Eliza alone, soaked, and utterly, completely humiliated. The grand marble-floored ladies' lounge of the Metropolitan Museum was a sanctuary of hushed tones and old-world elegance. Tonight, it was the scene of Eliza's collapse. She burst through the heavy oak doors, past a startled attendant, and into the farthest stall, where she finally, violently, retched into the toilet. The shock and shame had hit her stomach like a physical blow. She sank to the cool, tiled floor, her back against the stall wall, and the tears came. They weren't silent, graceful tears. They were the ugly, choking sobs of someone who had just had their last scrap of hope publicly incinerated. Her dress was ruined. Her painting was ruined. The one piece of herself she had dared to show the world was now a grotesque mockery, stained and sticky. "You simply don't belong here." Damien's voice echoed in her head, twisting around the memory of her father's. "He's a taker. He will drain you." They were right. She was a fool to think she could re-enter this world. A fool to think a dress could change who she was, the discarded wife, the failed daughter, the invisible woman. She heard the door to the lounge open. "Eliza! Elle! Are you in here?" It was Chloe Beaumont. Chloe rushed into the stall, her face a mask of horror. "Oh, honey, I saw. She knelt, pulling a handful of paper towels and dabbing uselessly at the massive dark stain. That child. And Damien. I could kill him. "It's ruined," Eliza whispered, her voice raw. "She ruined it." "Forget the dress," Chloe said, her voice fierce. "It's what they did to you. They did that on purpose, Elle. That was a performance. That was an execution." "I have to leave," Eliza said, trying to stand, but her legs were shaking. I can't go back out there. Everyone saw." "No," Chloe said, grabbing her arm. "You can't. If you leave now, they win. That's what they want. They want you to run home, crawl back into your studio, and disappear. That's the story Veronica Finch will write tomorrow. Eliza Sterling, soaked and shamed, flees gala." "So what?" Eliza cried, the tears flowing again. "It's true, look at me, I'm a mess. I don't belong here." She had used his exact words. The realization hit her, and the tears of shame turned to a cold, simmering rage. He didn't get to write her ending. He didn't get to define her. Eliza stood up, her spine stiffening. She looked at herself in the grand, gilded mirror. The woman looking back was a disaster. Her makeup was streaked, her hair was coming loose, and her dress, her beautiful, hopeful dress, was a symbol of her humiliation. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "No, you're right." She turned to Chloe. "Give me your jacket." "What?" Chloe was wearing a chic, black, velvet Saint Laurent blazer. "Your jacket. Give it to me, now." Confused, Chloe slipped it off. Eliza pulled off her own ruined, silk-painted jacket, leaving her in just the column dress. The stain was, if anything, even more prominent. It was a brutal slash of red against the white. Then she put on Chloe's blazer. It was slightly too big, but it was sharp. She buttoned it once, high on her waist. The effect was startling. The stain was still visible, peeking out above and below the blazer. It wasn't hidden. It was framed. She looked like a warrior. She looked like someone who had just walked through fire and hadn't bothered to wipe off the soot. "Elle, you're still stained," Chloe said gently. "I know," Eliza said, her voice dropping to a low, steady frequency Chloe had never heard before. "Let them look." She pushed her hair back, wiped the tears from under her eyes with an angry smudge, and grabbed her clutch. "Where are you going?" "Inside," Eliza said. "I paid for my ticket. I'm going to see the art." She walked out of the lounge, head held high, and re-entered the great hall. The murmur of the cocktail hour ceased as she passed. People stared. They pointed. They whispered. Eliza Sterling, in her stained dress and borrowed blazer, didn't look at a single one of them. She walked straight past the receiving line, past the tables of champagne, and into the main ballroom, just as the evening's dinner and presentations were about to begin. The ballroom was a masterpiece of opulence. Massive bouquets of white orchids dripped from the ceiling, and the tables were set for 1,000 of the world's most powerful people. The collective net worth in the room could have solved world hunger. Eliza found her assigned table. It was, predictably, near the back, by the kitchens. Table 94. She was seated with junior donors and the plus ones of people who mattered. Across the vast room, at table 1, sat Damien and Isabella. They were holding court, laughing as Isabella theatrically reenacted her tumble. Damien caught Eliza's eye from across the room. He raised his glass in a mock toast, his smile a perfect blend of pity and contempt. Eliza turned away, her stomach clenching, and focused on the stage. The director of the museum was speaking, thanking the donors, the artists, and the patrons. War. And now, the director said, his voice resonating with importance, it is my distinct honor to introduce our guest of honor. This is a man who needs no introduction, for his family's legacy is woven into the very fabric of this city, this nation, and indeed, the global economy. He is a titan of industry, a visionary philanthropist, and, I am proud to say, a pivotal supporter of this museum. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Arthur Sterling. The room erupted in applause. Eliza's heart stopped. She hadn't just seen his car, he was here. The guest of honor. A spotlight cut through the darkness and found a tall, imposing man in his late 70s, standing from a discreet table near the side of the stage. Arthur Sterling was not like Damien. Damien was a peacock, all bright plumage and noise. Arthur was an eagle. His hair was silver, his suit was a dark, impeccably tailored Savile Row creation that was probably older than Isabella, and his eyes were pale, calculating, and missed nothing. He walked to the podium and adjusted the microphone. The room fell into a heavy, expectant silence. This was a man who never gave public speeches. He looked out at the crowd, his gaze sweeping the room. Eliza, at table 94, felt the weight of it, even from a distance. Then his eyes found her. There was no flicker of recognition, no warmth, no anger. His gaze simply landed on her. He saw the stained dress. He saw the borrowed blazer. He saw her sitting alone at the worst table in the room. His eyes then moved, slowly, deliberately, across the ballroom to table 1. He watched Damien laugh and place a kiss on Isabella's bare shoulder. He held his gaze on them for a full 5 seconds. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice melt in the water glasses. Damien, sensing the shift in the room's energy, looked up. He saw Arthur Sterling staring at him. Damien's smile tightened. He gave a respectful, almost obsequious, nod. Arthur Sterling did not nod back. He turned his attention to the polished wooden podium. He had a set of note cards, a prepared speech. He touched them, his long, aristocratic fingers resting on the edge. Then, with a slight, almost imperceptible movement, he pushed the cards to the side. He gripped the edges of the podium, his knuckles white. He looked back out, not at the crowd, not at Damien, but directly, unequivocally, at his daughter. "Good evening," he said. His voice was a low gravel, amplified by the microphone, and it sent a chill down Eliza's spine. He was going off script. "I am told tonight's theme is legacy," Arthur Sterling began, his voice commanding absolute attention. "A fitting theme for a museum which houses the legacies of artists long since past. We in this room are obsessed with the concept." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "We build legacies of steel, legacies of code, legacies of capital. We acquire companies. We disrupt markets. We build skyscrapers that scrape the very heavens, all in an effort to leave a mark, to prove that we were here." His eyes were fixed on Eliza. She felt pinned to her chair, a butterfly under glass. "But we often mistake value for volume," he continued. "We mistake noise for substance. We celebrate the disruptors, the takers, the ones who burn down the old to make way for their new, shiny, and often hollow creations." At table 1, Damien Vance's smile had vanished. He was sitting bolt upright, his champagne glass untouched. He knew, as did everyone in the room, that he was the quintessential disruptor. "I have spent my life building an empire," Arthur said, his voice dropping slightly. "Sterling Enterprises. My father built it. His father built it. It is an empire of substance, of things you can touch, ships, steel, energy, things that last. And for 30 years the world has asked, who comes next? Who will carry this legacy? The camera feeds that had been projecting the stage onto massive screens at the side of the room suddenly panned, as if directed by an unseen hand, to find Damien and Isabella. Then they panned to the back of the room, finding Eliza, her stained dress and defiant posture thrown into sharp relief for all to see. "Tonight," Arthur said, his voice ringing with sudden cold anger, "I watched the new world interact with the old, and I was unimpressed." A collective gasp. This was not a speech. This was a reckoning. I watched a display of profound disrespect, a display of hollow vanity and calculated cruelty. Isabella Rossi's face had gone sheet white beneath her expensive tan. Damien looked apoplectic, his jaw working silently. He was trapped. To stand up, to protest, would be to admit the accusation. He could only sit and take it. "And I realized," Arthur continued, "that the leader my company needs is not someone who craves the spotlight. The leader I need is not someone who builds their worth by diminishing the worth of others." "The leader for Sterling Enterprises," he said, his voice rising to a crescendo, "must be someone who has been diminished and has refused to break. Someone who has been told they do not belong, and yet is still here." He raised his hand and pointed. Not a subtle gesture. A direct, unmissable accusatory point. But he wasn't pointing at Damien. He was pointing directly at table 94, directly at Eliza. "I have been testing my children, my heirs. I have been watching, waiting to see who had the fortitude, the resilience, the character to lead. I see now I have only one." The entire room turned, a wave of 1,000 horrified, ecstatic, and bewildered faces, all staring at the woman in the stained dress. Eliza had stopped breathing. This was not happening. This was a dream. This was a nightmare. "I am here tonight," Arthur Sterling declared, his voice a gavel strike of finality, "to announce my immediate retirement as CEO of Sterling Enterprises. And I am here to name my successor, the new Chief Executive Officer and the sole heir to the entire Sterling fortune and its controlling shares, is my daughter." He paused, letting the name hang in the air for one perfect, brutal second. Ms. Eliza Sterling. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the Metropolitan Museum of Art was the thwack, thwack, thwack of a single waiter dropping a tray of glasses by the kitchen door. Then, chaos. It was not applause. It was a roar, a cacophony of scraping chairs, of shouted questions, of 1,000 urgent, whispered conversations erupting at once. Did he say Eliza? His daughter? Sole heir? What about Julian? Referring to Eliza's reckless, party boy brother. The spotlights, which had been respectfully trained on Arthur Sterling, now swung wildly, hunting for their new target. They found her, at table 94, blinding her. On the massive screens, her pale, utterly shocked face was magnified 100 times, and the cameras, the photographers who had been relegated to the back of the room, burst past security. They stampeded between tables, a wave of flashing bulbs, all surging toward her. "Eliza! Eliza! Ms. Sterling!" Veronica Finch was at the front of the pack, her face a mask of predatory ecstasy. This was the story of the decade. "Ms. Sterling, what do you say to your father? Ms. Sterling, how does it feel?" Eliza couldn't speak. She was paralyzed, but the most profound reaction was not at table 94. It was at table 1. Isabella Rossi was staring, her mouth open, her influencer mask completely shattered. She looked like a child who had just been told that Christmas and her birthday were cancelled. "Damien," she whispered. What did he say? Damien Vance was no longer pale. He was a mottled, dangerous shade of purple. His hands were clenched so tightly on the table, his wine glass shattered in his grip. He didn't seem to notice the blood welling in his palm. He was staring at Eliza, but he wasn't seeing the woman he'd humiliated. He was seeing the $80 billion dollars. He was seeing the conglomerate that dwarfed his own company. He was seeing the woman who, 30 seconds ago, was nothing, and who now held the power to annihilate him. Vanstech had 2 major pending contracts with Sterling Shipping, a deal he had been leveraging his old, tenuous family connection to try and close. Without those contracts, his entire next quarter's projections evaporated. His shock curdled into a desperate, reptilian calculation. He was already planning his next move. On stage, Arthur Sterling didn't wait for the applause. He stepped down from the podium and began to walk, with that same unhurried, implacable pace, through the sea of stunned guests. The crowd parted for him, as if he were a biblical prophet. He walked past table 1. He did not glance at Damien. He walked all the way to the back of the room, to table 94, and stopped in front of his daughter. The cameras were blinding. The noise was deafening. Eliza looked up at the father she hadn't truly spoken to in a decade. His face was unreadable, but his eyes, there was something in his eyes. It wasn't love. Not yet. It was assessment. He did not hug her. He did not smile. Arthur Sterling was not a man for sentimental gestures. He simply extended a hand. "Eliza," he said, his voice quiet but carrying over the din. She looked at his hand. This was it. The moment. The choice. To stay the victim or to become something else. Her hand, shaking, rose and took his. His grip was like iron. He pulled her gently to her feet. The cameras went into a frenzy. "We have work to do," Arthur said, his voice for her ears only. "My car is waiting." He placed a hand on the small of her back, shielding her from the press, and began to guide her out of the ballroom. She was walking. She wasn't running. She was departing. As they reached the grand archway, Eliza paused. She turned just once and looked back. Her eyes found Damien's. He was standing now, his bloody hand forgotten. His face was a contortion of raw, undiluted panic. He looked small. He looked desperate. Eliza Sterling held his gaze. She said nothing. She didn't have to. Then she turned her back on him and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the stained dress, the broken glass, and the life she once knew behind her forever. The next morning, at 7 a.m. sharp, the 80th floor boardroom of the Sterling Enterprises Tower was already full. The view was commanding, overlooking Central Park, but the mood was frigid. The dozen board members, grizzled, grey-suited men and one formidable woman, Eleanor Davies, nursed their coffees and stared at the empty chair at the head of the table. They looked, Eliza thought, like a tribunal of angry owls. Eliza had slept for exactly 0 minutes. Her father's driver had taken her to his penthouse, a place she hadn't seen in 10 years, where a tailor and a lawyer were waiting. By 3:00 a.m., she had been fitted for an entirely new wardrobe and had signed a mountain of documents. Now she stood outside the boardroom, dressed not in silk or canvas, but in a bespoke, graphite-grey Armani power suit. Her hair was pulled back into a severe, elegant chignon. The only trace of the artist was the small, phoenix wing pin on her lapel. "They're skeptical," Arthur said, standing beside her. He too was in his uniform, a dark blue suit. "They see an art school hobbyist. They see the messy divorce. They see Julian." Ah, Julian, her younger brother, the intended heir. Julian Sterling was famous for 3 things: crashing a McLaren into a Monaco casino, dating a string of European starlets, and a crippling gambling addiction. "They think this is an emotional, rash decision from a senile old man," Arthur said flatly. They're preparing to challenge your appointment, to vote no confidence." "Why did you do it, Father?" Eliza asked, her voice quiet. "Was it pity? Because of what Damien did?" Arthur Sterling let out a dry, rasping sound that might have been a laugh. "Pity? Eliza, I don't trade an $80 billion company for pity. That stunt at the gala, that was merely the catalyst. It was the final piece of data." "Data? I haven't been ignoring you, Eliza. I've been watching you." He tapped his temple. "For 18 months, I've had a team tracking your every move." Eliza felt a chill, not of fear, but of comprehension. "I saw you build your art business," he said. "You started with your hush money, as you call it. You incorporated. You negotiated your own studio lease, undercutting the listed price by 30%. You sourced your materials from 3 different international suppliers, creating a bidding war for your contract. You placed your pieces in 2 small galleries and 1 online consortium, and in 1 year, your small, one-woman operation turned a 40% profit." Eliza stared at him. "You know all this." "I know," Arthur said, "that you didn't just get a degree in art history from Wharton. You were a double major, business administration, Sloan School, with honors. A degree you buried because your parasitic husband told you it wasn't feminine." He finally turned to look at her fully. "I didn't disapprove of your marriage because you chose love. I disapproved because you chose to be less. You shrank to fit into his world." The gala. That was the first time in a decade I saw the daughter I raised, the one who, when pushed, pushes back. He pointed to the door. "Julian is a liability. He's a hole in a balance sheet. You are a Sterling. Go in there and show them." Eliza took one deep breath, centered herself, and pushed open the heavy glass doors. She walked to the head of the table. The board members stared, their disapproval a tangible thing. "Good morning," Eliza said, her voice clear and steady. Mr. Abernathy, the lead director, a man with a face like a clenched fist, spoke first. "Ms. Sterling, this announcement is highly irregular. Your father has put this board, and our shareholders, in an untenable position. You have 0 corporate experience." "That's incorrect," Eliza said. She pulled a flash drive from her pocket and inserted it into the table's console. The massive screen at the end of the room lit up. "For the last year, I have been the CEO of ES Studios, LLC, a profitable, albeit small, international arts and logistics company. But you're right, Mr. Abernathy. That's not my relevant experience." She clicked a button. A new slide appeared. A financial analysis chart. "My relevant experience," she said, "is that I spent 10 years as the unpaid, unofficial strategist for your new media competitor, Vance Tech." The board stiffened. "While you were all dismissing Damien Vance as new money, I was the one who built his initial business plan. I was the one who identified his first 3 acquisition targets. And I am the only one in this room who knows exactly where his company is vulnerable." She clicked again. A complex web of shell corporations and offshore accounts filled the screen. "Mr. Vance," she continued, her voice like ice, "has a problem. His company is over-leveraged. He's been bleeding cash for 6 months, propping up a failing AI venture. He's desperate, so desperate, in fact, that he's resorted to unconventional funding." She zoomed in on one shell corporation, JS Capital, based in the Cayman Islands. "This entity," she said, "has funneled $200 million into Vance Tech in the last quarter. JS Capital, as I discovered last night, is 100% owned by my brother, Julian Sterling." The board gasped. Eleanor Davies swore under her breath. "It appears," Eliza said, "that Damien Vance hasn't just been a competitor. He's been blackmailing my brother, using his gambling debts as leverage, and forcing him to embezzle from the Sterling family trust to keep Vance Tech afloat. She had them. The room was hers. The artist had just exposed a multi-million-dollar fraud in under 5 minutes. Damien Vance's company is a house of cards, Eliza said, and the 2 contracts he has pending with Sterling Shipping, those aren't just contracts, they're his lifeline. Without them, he will default on his loans, and his company will implode within a week. Mr. Abernathy was pale. What are you proposing, Ms. Sterling? Eliza smiled. It was the first time she had smiled in 24 hours. It was not a nice smile. I am proposing, she said, that we cancel those contracts, effective immediately. And then I'm proposing we use the $200 million he stole from us as a down payment. We're not going to let Vance Tech implode. We're going to acquire it. We'll buy it for pennies on the dollar, absorb its assets, fire its corrupt CEO, and recoup every last cent my brother stole. Silence. Then Eleanor Davies, the formidable woman, began to clap, slowly, then steadily. Mr. Abernathy, stunned, joined her. One by one, the entire board was on its feet, applauding. Arthur Sterling, watching from the doorway, finally allowed himself a small, thin, and terrifyingly proud smile. The 36 hours following the gala were, for Damien Vance, a masterclass in psychological disintegration. The first 6 were spent in a state of pure, adrenaline-fueled rage. He had smashed a $50,000 crystal sculpture in his penthouse foyer, while Isabella, in a panic, had screamed at him. "What does this mean, Damien? What does this mean? That old man, he can't be serious. You told me she was nothing. You told me her family hated her." "Shut up," he had roared, his voice raw. "Just shut up, I'm thinking." But he wasn't thinking. He was panicking. The next 12 hours were spent in a blur of frantic phone calls. His first call at 7:01 a.m. was to Julian Sterling. It went straight to a disconnected message. He tried Julian's encrypted messenger, rad receipts, but no reply. The little rat was in the wind. His next 47 calls were to Eliza, each one a different shade of his unraveling psyche. The 9:00 a.m. calls were furious, demanding. "Eliza, call me, now. You have no idea what you're doing. You'll destroy that company. You need me." The 1:00 p.m. calls were condescending, manipulative. "Elle, darling, listen. I know you're just acting out. I know I hurt you, but this is too far. Let's have dinner. Just us. We can fix this." The 8:00 p.m. calls were desperate. "Eliza, please. Those Sterling Shipping contracts. That's just business. You can't let your father do this. He'll ruin me. Don't let him ruin me. I'll apologize. I'll make Isabella apologize." The 3:00 a.m. calls, drunk and maudlin, were pathetic. "I miss you. I never stopped. It was always you, Elle. She's nothing. She's a child. Please, I made a mistake. Don't do this." They all went to her new, stone-walling executive assistant, a man with a voice like a polite guillotine, who simply replied, "Ms. Sterling is unavailable." The final 18 hours were the worst. The market had opened. News of Arthur's speech had hit the financial wires like a bomb. Sterling Air named in shock move. Eliza. Sterling, ex-wife of Vance Tech's Damien Vance, tapped as sole successor. Then the second bomb dropped. Sterling Enterprises terminates 2 key logistics contracts with Vance Tech, citing immediate strategic review. Vance Tech stock, already teetering on a knife's edge, didn't just drop. It plummeted. It fell off a cliff. 40% of its value gone, wiped out before the lunch bell. His bankers, who had been so friendly last week, were now using words like collateral call and immediate default. He was ruined. He was finished. So when, at 9 a.m. on the second day, a formal, calendared invitation appeared in his inbox, he almost wept with relief. From Executive Office of the CEO, Sterling Enterprises subject, Vance Tech Kennesaw Sterling merger discussion. Time, 10 a.m. Sterling Tower, 80th floor boardroom. A merger. The relief was so profound, it instantly metastasized back into arrogance. Of course, she was going to save him. She still loved him. He had known it. This whole CEO thing was a front, a power play by her father to scare him. But Eliza, his Eliza, she was still in there. She was a painter, not a killer. She loved him too much to see him destroyed. She was bringing him in, offering him a lifeline, a partnership, a merger. He'd have to swallow his pride, maybe even give her a 60-40 split. But he would survive. He would live to fight another day. He put on his best suit, a cobalt blue Brioni designed to convey power and confidence. He kissed a high-strung, simpering Isabella goodbye, telling her, "Don't worry, baby, I'm going to handle this. We'll own this city by Christmas." He strode into the Sterling Tower, not as a supplicant, but as a partner. The 80th floor boardroom was designed to intimidate. It was a cavern of dark mahogany, smoked glass, and a single 50-foot table that looked like it had been carved from the heart of a mountain. The view of Central Park, far below, made the city look like a map you could simply fold up and put in your pocket. Eliza was already there, sitting at the absolute head of the table. She was not the woman from the gala. She was not the wife he had known. She wore a charcoal grey suit, severe and perfect. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it seemed to pull her eyes into a permanent, focused squint. She looked like a bird of prey. Her father, Arthur, sat at her right hand, not as the CEO but as the chairman. He was watching, silent. The entire board, the dozen angry owls from the day before, was present. They were arranged down both sides of the table, a tribunal of iron-grey suits and calculating eyes. They were not there to negotiate. They were there to watch a sentence be carried out. "Damien," Eliza said. Her voice was cold. It didn't echo. It just landed. "Thank you for coming." "Eliza," Damien said, spreading his arms wide, a performance of warmth and relief. He even started to walk toward her, as if for an embrace. "My God, Elle, what a crazy couple of days. This is a lot." A single uniformed security guard, standing by the door, took one subtle step forward. Damien stopped. "Please sit," Eliza said, gesturing not to the seat near her, but to the single, isolated chair at the very opposite end of the table. The defendant's chair. The confidence wavered, just a fraction. He was 50 feet away from her. He cleared his throat and sat, the performance snapping back into place. "Okay," he said, clasping his hands on the table. "A merger. I love it. I'm glad you see the potential. Your father, he's a lion, a true old-world lion. But this is the new world, Elle. You and me. Sterling's logistics and Vance Tech's, well, everything else. It's a perfect synergy. I've had my team draw up some potential valuations. Now, I know things are volatile, but I think a 60-40 split in your favor is more than generous. It shows my goodwill. It shows I still care." He smiled, his charming, billion-dollar smile. It had no effect. Eliza looked at him as if he were a specimen under glass. "There will be no merger, Damien," she cut him off. The smile froze. "What?" "There will be no partnership. There will be no 60-40 split. You are not here to negotiate. You are here to listen." She picked up a small remote, and the massive screen at the end of the room flickered to life. "Let's start with the contracts your team has been calling us about. A slide appeared. Contracts 881A, Sterling Pacific, and 904C, Sterling EU. Status terminated. You can't do that, Damien said, his voice rising. Those are ironclad. I'll sue you. I'll sue this whole company for tortious interference. Please do, Eliza said, her voice dangerously quiet. Our legal team would be happy to enter discovery. They are especially interested in the $1.2 million in kickbacks you paid to our former VP of Logistics to expedite the deal. We have his sworn affidavit, or perhaps they'd rather discuss the shell company in Cyprus you used to pay him. We have those wire transfers too. Damien's mouth snapped shut. He looked winded. But that, Eliza continued, is just housekeeping, a simple breach of contract. We're here to discuss something more significant. She clicked the remote. A new slide appeared. It was a complex web of offshore accounts, all funneling into one name. JS Capital, Cayman Islands. I don't know what that is, Damien stammered, his face losing its color. That's privileged information. It's stolen information, Damien, and stolen money. To the sum? She clicked again, and a number appeared in bright, brutal red. 450,000. Embezzled from the Sterling family trust by my brother, Julian. That's a lie. Damien half rose from his chair, his voice cracking. Julian is an investor. He's my friend. He believed in my vision. It was a private loan. A loan, Eliza said. She looked to Eleanor Davies, the formidable board member, who was looking at a file in front of her. Ms. Davies, Eliza said, you're our lead auditor. Does this look like a loan? No, Ms. Sterling, Eleanor said, her voice cutting. It looks like blackmail and embezzlement. The funds were withdrawn from the trust without authorization, using forged credentials in 5 separate tranches. Each withdrawal directly corresponds within 24 hours to a payment made from JS Capital to cover a margin call on Vanstech's institutional debt. Eliza looked back at Damien. He believed in your vision so much that you had to threaten him to get the money? No, you can't prove that. Can't I? Eliza said. Let's listen. She pressed a button on the console. A distorted, tinny voice filled the silent boardroom. It was Damien's. Audio clip. I don't care how you get it, Julian. Sell a fucking yacht. Ask your father. Or don't. You know what? Don't ask him. Just find it. Because if my banker calls me one more time, I'm sending your father a little video link from Macau. I wonder if he knows his son's taste in entertainment. You have 48 hours? The audio clicked off. Damien Vance was ashen. He was visibly shaking. And just in case that's not clear enough, Eliza said, we also have the emails. The screen filled with them. Threats. Bank account numbers. More threats. You're a joke, Julian. You're lucky I'm even talking to you. Now send the rest, or the post gets the photos. Your choice. While you were buying Balmain dresses, Eliza whispered, the microphone picking up every venomous syllable. While you were pouring champagne on people at galas, you were using stolen money, my family's money, to prop up your company, which is, at its core, as hollow as you are. Damien stared at her, his face a contortion of disbelief and pure, undiluted hatred. You. He was speechless. So, Eliza said, here is your one and only offer. It is not a negotiation. It is a choice. She stood up and walked, not quickly, but with a deliberate echoing pace, down the 50-foot length of the table, until she was standing directly in front of him. He was forced to crane his neck to look up at her. You have 2 options, Damien. Option A. You say no. You walk out of this room. And I will pick up this phone." She gestured to the console. "And I will call the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. I will hand him this entire file. The fraud, the wire transfers, the audio, the blackmail. You will be arrested before you reach the lobby. Vance Tech will be seized by the SEC. Your personal assets, your penthouse, your cars, Isabella's, things will be frozen and liquidated in a bankruptcy court. You will go to federal prison for a very, very long time." She leaned in closer. "And Julian, he'll go to prison too, as your co-conspirator." Damien's eyes widened in panic. "Or," Eliza said, "there is option B." She slid a thick, leather-bound document across the table. "You will sign this. It's a full confession. It's also a transfer of assets. You will sign over your 51% controlling shares and all personal assets tied to the company, to Sterling Enterprises, effective immediately. This will be valued at exactly $450,000. It will wipe out the debt you owe us. We will absorb Vance Tech, its patents, and its non-corrupt employees. We will restructure it." And me?" Damien whispered, his voice hoarse. "What happens to me?" "You," Eliza said, "will get nothing. You will be unemployed. You will be scrubbed from the company you built on my ideas. You will walk out of here with nothing but the suit on your back and the watch on your wrist. You will be a nobody. Just... Damien," she paused. "And in exchange for your full cooperation, Sterling Enterprises will not pursue criminal charges. The evidence of Julian's involvement will be buried. The debt will be considered paid." This was the master stroke. She wasn't just destroying him. She was cleaning her own house. She was protecting the Sterling name, even from itself. It was a move her father would have made. Damien stared at the document as if it were a snake. He looked up at her, his eyes begging. "Eliza, Elle, you can't. Please, this is everything. This is my life." "Your life?" she asked. You bitch," he finally spat, the last of his facade crumbling. "After everything I did for you, I made you. When I met you, you were a scared little girl, hiding in her father's shadow, painting your stupid, sad little pictures. I gave you a life. I put you on the red carpet. I made you Mrs. Damien Vance." The entire board winced. Arthur Sterling's face was granite. Eliza, however, did not flinch. She simply waited until he was done, his chest heaving. She looked at him, not with anger, but with a sudden, profound, and chilling clarity. "No, Damien," she said, her voice soft. "You didn't make me. You hid me. You found someone you knew was smarter than you, and you told her she wasn't. You told her to go paint. You told her she wasn't feminine enough. You told her to shrink so you could feel big." She leaned down, her face inches from his. "You told me, in front of the entire world, that I was in over my head, that I didn't belong." She smiled, the cold, sharp smile that he would see in his nightmares for the rest of his life. "You were right about one thing. I don't belong to you. I was never meant to be your wife. I was meant to be this. You just weren't smart enough to see it." She stood up to her full height. "You have 60 seconds to sign, or I make the call." Damien looked at the pen. He looked at the guards. He looked at Arthur, who was watching him with a look of utter, bored contempt. He looked back at Eliza. He saw no mercy. He saw no love. He saw no Eliza. He saw a Sterling. His hand, shaking so badly he could barely hold it, grabbed the pen and signed his name. He signed away his company, his life, his name. "Good," Eliza said, taking the document. "Now get out." "Eliza, please," he whispered, one last, pathetic attempt. "Miss Sterling," she corrected him. "Gentlemen," she nodded to the security guards. "Mr. Vance is trespassing." The guards took his arms firmly, and as they pulled him from the chair, he finally, completely, snapped. "You can't! You're nothing!" he screamed, his voice echoing through the opulent room. "You're just a spoiled, stained, empty—" The heavy mahogany doors slammed shut, cutting off his screams. The boardroom was utterly silent for a full 10 seconds. Then Eleanor Davies said, "Well, that was efficient." Eliza took a deep, shuddering breath. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a cold, hard resolve in its place. She walked, not to her chair, but to the massive, floor-to-ceiling window, looking down on the city that was now, unequivocally, hers. She felt a presence behind her. It was Arthur. He stood beside her, not speaking, just watching the flow of traffic, the veins of the city. "You protected Julian," he said. It wasn't a question. "He's a fool," Eliza said, not looking away from the window. "But his family. The $200 million is a loss, but the acquisition of Vance Tech's patent portfolio will more than cover it in 2 quarters. We didn't lose anything. We just transferred an asset." Arthur Sterling looked at his daughter. He saw the artist, and he saw the shark, and he finally understood that they were the same. He put a hand on her shoulder. It wasn't the detached gesture from the gala. It was firm. It was an anointing. "Well done, Ms. Sterling," he said. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," she replied. He squeezed her shoulder once. "Welcome home, Eliza." She looked at her reflection in the glass. The woman looking back was not a wife. She was not a victim. She wasn't even just a daughter. She was the heir. And she was just getting started. And just like that, Eliza Sterling didn't just get revenge. She reclaimed her entire identity. She went from being a ghost at the gala to the most powerful woman in the city, all because she refused to stay broken. Damien and Isabella? They became the footnote. He was last seen trying to launch a cryptocurrency from a rented office in Delaware. This story shows us that the ultimate comeback isn't just about winning. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be. The world will try to stain you, to tell you that you don't belong. Let them. Hold your head high, wear that stain like a badge of honor, and wait for your moment. Because power doesn't always go to the loudest person in the room. It goes to the most resilient. What did you think of Eliza's power move? Let me know in the comments below. If you loved this story of revenge and redemption, do me a favor and hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe for more real-life drama every week.